The gym went silent. 2,000 people. 2,000. Not gathered for an exhibition. Not arranged by promoters. Just there. Boxing gym. Late afternoon. The kind of space where you can hear a speed bag 20 feet away. Hear sweat hit canvas. Hear breathing. But not now. The crowd had stopped breathing. It was 1976, the year Muhammad Ali lost his speed, the year Mike Tyson was still a kid in Brooklyn, the year when size still meant something in combat sports, when a heavyweight champion could walk into any dojo, any gym, any martial arts facility in America and the air would change, and everyone would know it. Earnie Shavers stood 6'4", 212 pounds of muscle that looked like it was carved from something harder than flesh. He wasn't just a boxer, he was a force, the kind of fighter who had flattened Muhammad Ali twice, the kind of opponent that made heavyweights step back, not in fear, in respect, in recognition. Chuck Norris walked the other way entirely. He didn't carry his presence the way Shavers did. There was no announcement in his shoulders, no warning in his stance. 6'1", 185 pounds, lean, methodical. The kind of man you'd miss in a crowd if you weren't paying attention. But 2,000 people that day? They knew who he was. They knew what he represented. The tension wasn't about anticipation. It was about collision. Earnie Shavers had made a reputation on one principle. Size wins. Not technique, not discipline, not even training. Size, leverage. The biological reality that a man built like a concrete wall can destroy a man built like a dagger. For 5 years, Shavers had proven this theory across boxing rings and gym floors across America. He'd come to this karate gym that afternoon not with respect, with a dare. He'd said it plainly to the gym owner. Get your best fighter. I want to see what karate actually does against real power. The message traveled fast. Chuck Norris was the other direction of everything Shavers represented. He didn't believe in size. He believed in precision. He believed that a pound of force applied at the exact right angle, at the exact right moment, with the exact right understanding of leverage and physics, could redirect an ocean. He'd spent 15 years proving that a smaller man with technique could devastate a larger man without it. These two philosophies had finally collided in the same room. Shavers walked in already certain. He'd knocked out heavyweights. He'd pushed Ali across the ring. He'd seen karate tournaments on television and found them underwhelming. All speed and no substance. All spin and no power. When he arrived at that gym, he wasn't curious. He was testing a hypothesis he already believed was true. Chuck watched him enter. No change in expression, no shift in posture. He was dressed simply. A gi, bare feet. That was all. Shavers still had the residual presence of having just come from a training session elsewhere. The swagger of a man who had dismantled opponents for a living. They stood maybe 15 feet apart. The gym owner introduced them. Unnecessary. The crowd already knew who each other were. Shavers nodded, not respectfully. More like an acknowledgement, like saying, I see you. I understand what you are, and I'm still not worried. Chuck didn't nod back. He simply tilted his head slightly, listening. That was the first sign that nobody in that crowd understood yet. Listening. While Shavers was broadcasting power, while everyone else was settling into anticipation, Chuck was listening. To the space, to the silence, to what was about to happen. There's a moment in every confrontation when the narrative splits, when one path leads to legend, and another leads to forgotten memory. That moment had arrived. The crowd didn't know it yet, but Chuck did. Section 3. Escalation. The pressure builds. Shavers moved first. Not aggressively. More like a test. He shifted his weight, a subtle repositioning of his stance. The kind of thing a heavyweight does when he's evaluating distance and leverage. His jaw tightened slightly. Not from tension, from certainty. He'd done this 1,000 times. Walk in, assert presence. Watch the smaller man either back away or make a mistake. Chuck's eyes tracked the movement. Just his eyes. Not his head. Not his body. The economy of movement was already speaking. It was saying, I see everything. I'm not wasting energy. The seconds stretched. 30 people in the front row could see Shavers' face clearly, could see the confidence settling deeper into his features. He was already winning in his mind. Before anything happened, he had already won because he believed he had no way to lose. And there's a power in that belief. A real power. Not supernatural, but real. Shavers took a step closer. 2,000 people in that gym felt it. Not just saw it, felt it. The way you feel weight shifting. The way you feel a storm system moving toward you before the rain arrives. Shavers brought something with him when he moved. Density, gravity, the physical reality of a man who had trained to hurt people for a profession. Chuck's feet were shoulder-width apart. His hands relaxed at his sides. The gym owner took a step backward. Instinct. The kind of instinct that comes from understanding that whatever was about to happen, you didn't want to be between these two men. The owner had seen Chuck train, had seen him move, but he'd also watched boxing matches, had seen Earnie Shavers knock out men in seconds. What was about to happen existed in a space between two different understandings of combat, and no one in that crowd knew which understanding would win. Shavers continued forward, not slowly, not aggressively, just moving, the way a 500-pound bear moves towards something it's curious about. Not hurrying because there's no reason to hurry. It's already decided what's going to happen. 20 feet became 15 feet. 15 became 10. Chuck still hadn't shifted. In that decade, there was a saying among fighters who trained with Chuck Norris: he doesn't fight you, he understands you. That understanding was about to become visible. The breathing in the gym had stopped entirely now. Even the overhead fans seemed to slow. 8 feet of space remained between them. Shavers' shoulder muscles flexed. Small movement, preparation. His right hand was still at his side, but his body was loading. Not consciously, but through thousands of hours of training that had become automatic. The heavyweight was preparing to do what heavyweights do: move forward, use mass, apply pressure, watch the smaller opponent either retreat or crumble. Chuck's eyes narrowed, just barely, a millimeter shift in focus, like a camera adjusting its lens. And in that adjustment, something changed. The energy in the gym shifted, not dramatically, but perceptibly. The crowd felt it, that this moment had transformed from demonstration into something else, something real. Shavers felt it too, and it created the first hesitation. Not fear, not doubt, but recognition. The recognition that this man wasn't broadcasting fear, wasn't backing away, wasn't doing the things that preceded getting hit by a heavyweight champion. Instead, he was perfectly still, perfectly composed, perfectly present. That's when Shavers made his decision. He reached forward.
Not to hit, to move. His hand extended toward Chuck's gi, toward the fabric at his chest, and in one fluid motion, Shavers pulled. Not gently, with intent. The kind of pull that was supposed to break balance, to draw Chuck forward into a power shot, to set up the inevitable. 2,000 people saw it happen. And then they saw what happened next. The pull happened. Shavers' hand closed on Chuck's gi and pulled with the certainty of a man who had pulled opponents forward 1,000 times. Heavyweights, fighters who'd been through wars, men who'd trained for decades in hand-to-hand combat. And every time, the pull worked. Every time, the forward momentum created a vulnerability. Every time, the follow-up strike was devastating. This time was different. Chuck moved forward. Yes, the pull worked in that sense. His body came forward just as Shavers intended, but there was no loss of balance, no momentary vulnerability, no split-second exposure where the heavyweight could land his knockout blow. Instead, Chuck moved into the space that was opening, not away from the power, into it. His right hand came up in a line so direct and so fast that the crowd didn't see it move. They saw the space. They saw Shavers' hand on Chuck's gi. They saw Chuck's position shift. And then they saw Earnie Shavers' entire body contract backward as if he'd been hit by something that didn't exist. 3 milliseconds. That's the window that separated Shavers' intention from the impact of Chuck's response. 3 milliseconds. The time it takes for a professional heavyweight boxer to process what's happening to his body. And in those 3 milliseconds, Shavers' mind was trying to calculate how he'd been hit so hard so fast when he didn't see a punch coming. Because there was no punch. There was precision. Chuck's hand made contact not with Shavers' face or body, but with the exact point where Shavers' own momentum and leverage were concentrated. The palm strike didn't need to be powerful. The power was already there. It was already being generated by Earnie Shavers' own motion. Chuck simply redirected it, amplified it, sent it back toward the source. Shavers stumbled backward. Not dramatically, not in a way that looked like a defeat, just backward. His hand released from Chuck's gi. His body repositioned itself in the way that boxers do when they've been caught with something unexpected. His eyes blinked. Once. Twice. The gym remained silent. But it was a different silence now. Not the silence of anticipation, The silence of having witnessed something that didn't fit the narrative. The silence of 2,000 people.
Watching a heavyweight champion be moved backward by a man built like a martial artist, not brutally, not violently, but completely, absolutely, undeniably. Shavers' jaw tightened, not in pain, but in understanding. He reset his stance. His eyes focused back on Chuck with new calibration. Not fear, but recognition. The recognition that everything he'd believed about size versus technique was being rewritten in real time. That his pull forward hadn't been resisted, it had been understood, accepted, and redirected with such precision that his own force had become the weapon against him. Chuck stood exactly where he'd been standing, feet shoulder-width apart, hands relaxed, breathing normal. No visible exertion, no sign that anything had transpired except for the simple fact of Shavers being a step further backward than he'd been 5 seconds earlier. That was all the proof the gym needed. In that moment, the story stopped being about a demonstration. It became about mythology. He didn't attack, didn't try another technique, didn't reach out a second time. He simply stood there, breathing, recalibrating, understanding. The kind of understanding that comes not from words or explanation, but from direct experience, from having your own momentum used against you by someone who understood physics the way most people understand breathing. The crowd remained motionless, not frozen, alive, but stunned into stillness. They'd come to watch one thing, they'd witnessed something else entirely. Earnie Shavers, who'd knocked out heavyweights, who'd pushed Muhammad Ali across rings, who'd been written about in boxing magazines as an unstoppable force, had been moved backward by a martial artist in less than a second. Not brutally, not with overwhelming power, but with precision, with understanding, with technique so perfect that it made force seem irrelevant. 30 seconds passed, maybe more. Time worked differently in that moment. Shavers nodded, a slow, deliberate nod. Not concession, recognition. The nod of a man who just learned something that would stay with him for the rest of his life, that size wasn't automatic superiority, that there were other laws at work in combat besides gravity and mass. Chuck simply waited. He wasn't celebrating, wasn't asserting dominance, was simply present, in the way that comes from complete confidence, not arrogance, confidence. The difference being that arrogance needs validation, while confidence simply exists. The gym owner stepped forward. Not to intervene, to acknowledge. He didn't finish the sentence. There were no words for what 2,000 people had just witnessed.
Shavers walked toward the exit, not in defeat, in contemplation. He stopped at the doorway, turned back, and looked at Chuck one more time. That look contained more truth than any post-fight interview ever could. It contained the collapse of an assumption, the birth of a question, the recognition that the world was more complex than he'd believed 20 seconds earlier. Within hours, the story had spread. Not through social media, there was no social media, but through the martial arts community, through boxing circles, through the gym floors and training facilities and interview studios of 1976. Earnie Shavers went to a karate gym and got moved backward by Chuck Norris. The details changed, the core truth remained. By the next week, the story had evolved. Shavers pulled him forward and Chuck threw him across the room. The specific mechanics had become less important than the essential fact. A heavyweight champion had challenged a martial artist and discovered there were forms of power he'd never encountered before. Only a few hundred people had been in that gym. The story had reached millions. Pattern interrupt, the ripple. Legends aren't created on the day they happen. They're created in the stories that follow. But here's what matters more than what happened in that gym. Here's what those 2,000 people witnessed that day that extended far beyond two men in the same space. Earnie Shavers represented a thesis, a statement about the nature of human combat that most of the world accepted without question, that the largest, strongest, most powerful fighter would win, that biology determined outcome, that mass equals dominance, that the heavyweight champion would always defeat the lighter man because physics is physics and there's no arguing with physics. Chuck Norris represented something else. Not a thesis, a question. What if the laws of physics were even more basic than mass? What if they included leverage, positioning, timing? What if the man who understood the complete system could use the other fighter's own force against them? What if speed could defeat strength if speed carried understanding with it? The moment Shavers pulled and Chuck moved forward without losing center, that question became visible. The moment Chuck made contact and Shavers moved backward, that question became concrete. The moment Shavers walked away understanding something he hadn't understood 5 minutes earlier, that question became legend. And that legend spread through the martial arts world in 1976 like light through a prism. Because young fighters were watching, they were learning, they were training in karate and kung fu and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, while heavyweight champions were still thinking that mass was
destiny. And when word spread that Earnie Shavers, the man who'd knocked out heavyweights, who'd challenged Muhammad Ali, had been moved backward by a lighter, smaller martial artist, something shifted. Permission shifted. The permission to believe that technique was as important as strength. The permission to believe that understanding was more powerful than force. The permission to believe that mastery existed on a level beyond simple dominance. That's what Chuck Norris represented that day. Not superiority, but a different category of power entirely. The power that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't need to be broadcast, that simply exists as a function of complete understanding. Shavers had come into that gym believing that size was the final word in combat. He'd left understanding that size was the opening statement. And in the decades that followed, that understanding echoed forward. Through the rise of mixed martial arts, through the evolution of combat sports, through the increasing recognition that technique matters, that leverage matters, that positioning matters, that the smallest man in the room with the deepest understanding could have power that size couldn't measure. Chuck Norris never needed to fight Earnie Shavers. One moment of redirection was sufficient. Because it wasn't about victory, it was about demonstrating a principle, about showing, in a way that couldn't be denied, that there were forms of power that the heavyweight boxing world hadn't yet encountered, about making visible what martial artists had been saying for centuries, that mastery isn't about being the strongest, it's about understanding so deeply that strength becomes irrelevant. Pattern interrupt. The quiet truth. The most powerful demonstration is the one that requires the least power. The story of Chuck Norris and Earnie Shavers that day wasn't about victory or defeat. It was about the moment when the old understanding of combat met the new understanding. And the new understanding won. Not through force, through precision. Not through power, through comprehension. Not through dominance, through mastery. That's the lesson that lived on far longer than any specific technique. That's the philosophy that changed martial arts and eventually transformed how the entire world understood combat. A heavyweight champion walked into a gym believing one thing. He left, having learned another. And 2,000 people walked away carrying a story that would reshape an entire discipline. Because sometimes the most powerful moment isn't the most violent one. It's the one where the world changes not with an explosion, but with a simple redirection of force, with a hand that understands position, with a man who's learned to listen so carefully that he can hear what his opponent is about to do before they know it themselves. That's the mastery that doesn't announce itself. That's the power that requires no broadcast. That's the legend that echoes forward. And that day in 1976, in front of 2,000 people, inside a gym in America, two men showed us what that looked like. The heavyweight pulled forward. The martial artist moved in. And the entire nature of combat was rewritten in the space of 3 seconds.